Nivi, I really appreciate you being here with me on the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast. For folks who are unfamiliar with you and the work that you do, would you mind introducing us?
Yeah, of course. So, first of all, Corey, thanks for having me on. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Nivi Achanta. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup called Soapbox Project. And basically, we make social impact easy for busy people. So, I can tell you all about how that looks, but I'm sure that everyone listening to this has gone through a moment where you want to do something good, but you have kids or an 80-hour work week job or whatever else is the reason that is inhibiting you from making a difference. I understand how frustrating that is because I was in that position. So I wanted to start Soapbox to actually do something to help other people do something.
Mm. I love it. And I would love to start right there with what you hinted at is that you were in that position yourself. So I'd love if you could share a little bit more as to what was the impetus for you personally for starting Soapbox.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing for people to know about me is that I am a pretty average like I don't have a very special background or a very exquisite job or anything like that. So I worked in consulting for the first 3 years of my corporate career, just like every other college student that majors in business or whatever. So I was working at Accenture doing tech consulting and it was fine, it was just like your run of the mill corporate job, but I realized that the work that I was doing, 9 to 5 or 9 to whatever hours a day, it just didn't matter. It wasn't terrible. Like I wasn't working for an oil company, but it also wasn't doing anything positive. And so what I was realizing is that every time I would run into my work friends, we would all have the same conversations over and over and over and over again about how, we should do something about the homelessness in San Francisco, or we should donate, or we should volunteer together, or we should fight climate change, or insert like 50 things going on in our city. And like 6 months of this had passed, and it slowly dawned upon me that we were just like talking and talking and talking about this, but none of us was making the time to actually turn our intentions into action. And so I decided, like, look, somebody has to break the cycle, so let me try. And it was surprisingly hard. Like, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is education. I love working with kids. Something as simple as figuring out how to read in a classroom, like volunteer in my afternoons, that was like impossible to figure out what programs were still going, which schools you could go to, what time, how to sign up. So I feel like everything I was trying to do, first of all, there was even a very few things that I even knew that I wanted to do. Reading to kids was like the one thing that popped into my head, but I just feel like I was on a wild goose chase of social impact. And I just felt really, really guilty because here I was like working this cushy job and earning a salary, but not understanding how to use that to create meaningful change in my community. So eventually, later, all of that frustration has culminated into Soapbox Project.
Hmm. And talk to me about that culmination a little bit. I mean, where were we from that frustrating effort to find something as simple as volunteer opportunities in local schools to then perhaps how I discovered you, which was a recommendation for your change letter, your weekly newsletter. So how do we get, which is such a polished and really actionable, engaging piece of writing that I get in my inbox every single week. Definitely recommend people check it out. But how do we go from just an individual experiencing that frustration, perhaps sharing that with their peers, to what's now become Soapbox, which is really something of a legitimate operation, touching a lot of people every single week.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you, Corey, for recommending our little change letter. I'm very proud of it. So, before I answer that question, just to give everyone listening an overview of what Soapbox is now, because I'm sure this podcast will be about my like messy journey to get here. But what it is now is, there's marketing funnels and sales funnels and all of these different things in the business world that make it easier to move from point A to point B. Well, the way that I've been thinking about Soapbox starting like the beginning of 2021 is a social justice funnel. So the goal is so that anyone in the world can take action in a way that's meaningful for them and their community. So obviously that's like a huge ambitious vision type thing. And I'll go into how we kind of break that down further. But like in short, we start with the free newsletter, the one that Corey mentioned. If you want to keep getting more engaged and have more accountability, you can come to our events. And if you want even more accountability and friends and local action and all this amazing stuff, we have a membership community that like really connects you in your geography, in topics that you care about, and all of that. So, really, just the goal is to build those bridges. If you're a person that was like me, that was like, help, I have some money, I have a little bit of time, and I want to do something positive, and Soapbox actually helps you get there. So, like, rewinding to actually answer your question, it took like a year or two of exploration because I don't have a social justice background. So
Mm.
you know my family cared about service, and they pulled the whole like don't waste your food, there's people in the world that are starving type thing. And every now and then we would volunteer at the Salvation Army, but I wasn't raised in like a community that was about mutual aid and justice and like talking about climate change and all of those things. So once I got into the workplace, I it's not like I had this squad that was like protesting and volunteering and donating and all of those things. So it took me like probably at least a year to go from my confusion to creating what is now Soapbox. And so the way this started is I was sitting down with one of my mentors and telling her this exact problem of, hey, Michelle, like I don't really like my job. I just started it like 2 months ago. I already don't like it because it just feels like there's so much wrong in the world and I'm not contributing. And she actually said, why don't you start a podcast about the things that you care about? And so I actually ended up doing that like in 2017, from 2017 to maybe like 2018-ish. I ran a podcast about American education because that's like what I really wanted to dive into. And the more I was doing that, the more I realized, first of all, how much work podcasting is, but second of all, how there's a lot of knowledge already out in the world. And the problem is kind of like, yeah, sure, knowledge is a very important piece of that equation. But for the group of people that are like me, chances are we have enough knowledge, but we don't have the next step. Like, what do you do with that knowledge? What do you do when you read a really upsetting news article about, I don't know, like immigration detention camps or whatever, all the horrible things that have been in the news since at least
Mhm.
2016. And so, as I kind of figured out that maybe podcasting wasn't it, email newsletters were like the next buzzy thing. So I was just like, let me try this. Let me just try creating action plans on issues I care about. And initially, it was going to be on like a whole range of social issues, and we might go more towards that again. But the big thing on everyone's mind has been climate change, and climate is also a really difficult thing to figure out what your place is. So yeah, I just started with that, and I was like, I'm gonna write this for myself, figure out what I can do on topics like fast fashion and food waste and stuff. And, the more I was doing it and the more I was talking about it, it just like started gaining a lot of traction. So that was kind of my, the journey is obviously a lot longer than that. But the moral of the story for me is like, you really just have to try a lot of things and
Mm.
see what works and doesn't work. And like the most important thing for me was talking to as many people as I could to figure out like if they had shared the same challenges as me or just really really understand what the problem is that I'm trying to solve.
Hmm. That's really interesting. And I think something that always draws me in, or that appeals to me, is what brought you from concept and idea into actually taking action. Because you have this conversation with the mentor that you mentioned, and it is very common for many of us. I'm sure some folks listening to the show to feel some curiosity, some desire to perhaps use their skills and the capacities to create something like you have. And I'm wondering what do you think was particular about you at that point in time, or environmentally, whatever was happening, perhaps for you and around you, that then took you from concept to actually taking the action, like you mentioned, to starting a podcast. It's okay that you're not running one. I'm doing it for you, and you got a good microphone out of it. I can tell.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but what was some of the contributing factors to what brought you actually to take action? Because it's almost representative of
Yeah,
the entire thing that you're doing with Soapbox is reducing that friction to
totally.
make action and impact more accessible for people. So what was that for you
Totally.
in your environment or
So,
experience?
yeah. So earlier, when I was talking about how I'm like your average person, I think the main thing that has always set me apart is I just have a bias towards action. And I think, for being totally honest, I think that's because I get bored easily. Like, I just need to have some, I'm just the most restless person ever. And so there's a lot of people that have amazing ideas and just sit on them and sit on them and sit on them and then don't do anything about it. And I think that's, for a number of reasons from other entrepreneurs that I've talked to. I think two of the main reasons is like, number one, feeling like you don't have enough time, and sometimes you don't. And the second reason is I think people want to make their projects perfect
Mm.
and they, have all these huge dreams. And for me, I never dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur. I didn't even call myself a podcaster until like a few episodes into my podcast, because for me, I don't know, I just think I saw it a little differently. I was just frustrated and I wanted to solve a specific problem for myself and for the people that I was talking to. And so at that time, there wasn't a lot of ego surrounding it. I think that any entrepreneur, like, we always have to grapple with our egos and
Mm.
all of that. But at the time, I just like knew that I wanted to do something to spread awareness, whether it was education or climate or whatever. So I think one big thing that I've learned is, again, like, I don't have any super amazing technical skills or this like background of going to Harvard. I just went
Mhm.
to like a states, like a UC Davis in California. And honestly, like, the main reason why I, in my own opinion, am successful, we can define success in a number of ways, but I do think I'm successful because I'm good at launching things and sticking with the things that I know that work.
Mm.
So I think that's just like something that anyone can do, is just seriously, if you're like thinking about an idea, just launch the most basic version of it, because if you don't do that, you're not going to have momentum. And I think that's like one of the most important lessons that I've learned is, I'm not like a super self-motivated person, but when I have momentum and I know that people are watching and listening, like, I think the two forms that you meant that we've been talking about, like the podcast and the newsletter, that has an audience, whether that's like five people listening to it and one of them's my mom, I know that there's going to be five people that expect me to put something out. So I think that, like, starting with a bias towards action and finding like a kind of public medium was really important to me to keep it consistent. So that was one thing. The second thing is something that I'm realizing more recently, is I think every single person should have an example of when they did something powerful that they didn't expect.
Mm.
So for me, that was in 2018 when I was working at Accenture. And you probably remember, I don't know, actually, there's been so many fires since then, but in 2018 in Northern California, the Camp Fire broke out. And at the time, that was the most destructive wildfire in California history. And it was only 3 hours north from the San Francisco office. And, like, long story medium, my partner's house had burned down, his whole family's, like, five different family members' houses had burned down. It was like a whole horrible, horrible situation. And I remember going back to work at Accenture in the Salesforce Tower, which is like the highest, fanciest building in San Francisco, and no one was doing anything about this, even though the fire was like relatively close. Like, it was just business as usual.
Mm.
So what I did, and keeping in mind, I was only like 12 months into my professional career. I graduated a year before this, and I just like made this proposal on, please give me money and a team, and we want to go up there and do some research and volunteer and help out. And I sent it to all of the Johns in the office, literally all the powerful execs. All of their name was John. It's hilarious. But I sent it to them and they approved it. And so after that project, I just realized, like, any person, like, you really just have to do something. And, the worst thing that people can say is no. I know that's a cliche, but it's really true. But
Mm.
if it works, like, that kind of thing sticks with you forever, because I'll always look back and say, this isn't something that was expected of me. This isn't something that I thought was going to work. But I realized that me, as like a baby in my career, was still able to do a month-long disaster relief project just because I acted on my idea. Like, it was literally nothing else. I just had the idea, but instead of keeping it to myself, I asked for help and I asked for support, and it worked. So I think that, like, one takeaway from that experience is, what I've been trying to tell people recently is, even if it's a tiny example, like, it can be big or small, but anchor yourself on a time when you did something that made a difference, because I think that's like a huge, huge way to motivate yourself and know that you have a lot more power than you realize.
Mm, I totally agree. That small bit of courage, you know, in that moment, small or however it felt, you know, it's probably all relative to the moment for you, and you know how you feel about yourself and the circumstance. It becomes a muscle that you can train again and again. You know what, exactly as you
Mhm.
mentioned. Then you anchor in that. I love that description, to then, you know, help use that momentum for the next thing. And likewise, with some of those constraints, it's like set up those systems, set up those constraints, the moat essentially around protecting your effort,
Mhm.
to make it harder and harder for you to quit. I mean, you
Yes,
know, make sure
yes.
you're enjoying yourself along the way. But I think that likewise, with you, I share that I'm wonderful at starting things. I'm really good at starting a lot of projects. The trouble I have can be sustaining something. But the newsletter example was a big one for me, or the podcast here, is that getting on that schedule, it almost felt as if I had no other choice to be able to
Yeah,
write, publish, and send a newsletter on Mondays, or publish a podcast every Tuesday. You know, and that
yeah.
writing that momentum time after time, worrying a little bit less about every single individual newsletter as to, you know, if it's perfect or not. It's like, all right, is
Yes,
this,
yeah.
you know, as good as I can get it, but it's done and it's published? You know, focusing on that, to
Yeah.
where then, you know, all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but sort of, you're like, I can't stop this machine. You know, you want to
Yeah,
create that sort of
exactly.
experience. So it feels
Exactly.
like it will continue, you know, no matter what. Um, and so here we are now. I think the last time we checked in on it, there's some 6,000, maybe 7,000 readers of the change letter. You can correct me on the details.
Yeah, it fluctuates from like five. It fluctuates depending on the number of bots that we get on a daily basis. I think right now we're somewhere around 5,000. I think I was like looking at the past stats, and I think the highest was like 10,000, but like a good number of them were spam bots. So you're in the right ballpark.
Well, but either way, there's a significant number of folks who are reading and engaging with this newsletter every single week. What do you think has led to the traction on it, and the increase in readership with time?
Yeah, so the one of the first things early on is, when we were living in an in-person world, I would not stop talking about this newsletter. And I think it was important for me to see people's faces. Like, the reason that I knew that this would keep going is I would tell people about it, and instead of being like, "Oh, cool, that sounds awesome," they would pull out their phone and sign up.
Mm.
So that was like early on. That's not the that's not the traction method any longer. But that was like a big thing, is just like constantly telling people what you're working on and giving them the chance to sign up if they want to, but not being like, "Hey, I run this newsletter, you have to sign up."
Mhm.
Like, I was at their doctor's appointment a couple weeks ago, and I was mentioning, because the doctor's making small talk, and she's like, "Oh, so what do you do?" And I told her. She was like, "Please take my email and add me to this list." So that's like probably my favorite method of getting it to grow. Two other distinct turning points was launching on Product Hunt, I think early in 2020 ish. So that, I mean, at the time we had like some hundreds of subscribers, and Product Hunt caused it to double. And it
Mm.
was also a good way of getting feedback and getting people that I had never met. Like, these were not friends of friends, they're like random people on the internet. So that was one thing. And then the other main traction, like, boost, which unfortunately I can't give you any advice on because it was kind of just luck, is we got this amazing feature in the New York Times last year in December. And I was just like chatting with this journalist in one of my many online communities, and she was like, "Hey, is anyone writing about capitalism?" And I was like, "Yeah, kind of." And so I thought she was just going to quote me on this piece, but we were like a third of the article
Wow.
that she put out. So that was amazing. But beyond those two kind of one-off things, I think the most challenging thing has been getting people to share about it. Like, I always have those buttons that's like share, but that has been like one of the less traceably successful things. But I think the stuff that has been working is putting on events, like just what I said earlier, just talking about it all the time, whether it's Twitter, whether it's online communities. And then the last thing, like, about talking about the newsletter, is people don't just want to hear about what you're saying. So one of the biggest things that I do is anytime someone replies to one of my emails, I will always reply back, and more often than not I'll ask if they want to chat. And so
Mm,
I guess that like doesn't really answer your traction question, but that's one of the biggest ways that I build connection with people in the audience and like get them to see me as a person and not just like a random, words in their inbox. So just like really engaging in the communities that I'm in, and yes, taking the time to like talk to people about what Soapbox is and hopefully getting them excited, but also supporting other people on their projects and contributing knowledge that's not just like, hey, here's a link to my newsletter. So all of those things have been definitely factors in increasing our readership and also just increasing our engagement.
mm. I mean, I'm with you. There's so much that is luck to a lot of the growth in these scenarios, but part of it, as I like to think about it, is something of creating luck a little bit. As to,
Mhm.
it sounds like you're pretty active in a lot of different online communities, and that's probably what created that opportunity. And
Mhm.
for folks listening in to kind of take the potential strategy or tactic out of that is like, you never really know exactly where an opportunity like that will come, or when it
Mhm.
will come, or
Mhm.
how it will come, but it's starting to learn, kind of as you said earlier, of paying attention to like what things are working for you and doing more of those. It's
Yeah.
likewise like just putting yourself in situations where there's opportunity for serendipity a little bit.
Totally. I love the way that you put that on, like, creating luck, because that's like a spiel I'll sometimes give to anyone who wants to listen, is like, maybe everyone has like similar luck probabilities, right? But the only way you're going to increase your actual luck is like engaging more in different things. If you're lucky like 10% of the time, you are going to win more if you
Mm,
basically play more, because there's no downside. So again, with me being like a restless person, that definitely helps, because I like one of my I don't remember if this is a New Year's resolution or what, but I just realized one day in college that, like, if I'm ever having a bad day, I just need to get out. Like, I need to leave the house, because all sorts of things happen to you when you leave the
mm,
house. Like, you'll discover a new store, or like, I don't know, you'll see like a cute baby or whatever the thing is, or like maybe you'll even see like a backyard concert or something, that happens in college towns. But that's something that I have tried to apply to various areas of my life, is just like really physically leave your house and then leave your comfort zone and like try to expand your comfort zone so you can do exactly what you're saying, Corey, on like, luck isn't just like a static thing, it's something that you can cultivate.
mm. Yeah, and the nice thing that I've said a few different times on this podcast is that there's something really nice about being in the space of social impact or sustainability, in that people in this space are very generous and open, and you would think, given that the goals are to address the climate crisis as an example, or uh, um, work on important social justice issues. It's like we're on the same side, and so it's a different landscape of business. It's a different landscape
Mhm.
of professional career, to where others' success really continues to advance us all towards what is a shared goal.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it would be contradictory that, if you're genuinely and authentically reaching out and connecting with people and connecting with their work, that it's not reciprocated in
Mhm.
some way or received well, uh,
Yeah.
because we're kind of, all in theory working towards the same objectives.
Right. Yes, in theory. I do think that that's like generally true, but I think that like regardless of the work that people are doing, we do exist in a system that promotes competition and the
Sure.
scarcity mindset. So I try to only work with people that I know that like not every single thing is a transaction and they are in this because they care and not just because,
Mm,
they want to be recognized. But yeah, it is hard like even for me to like check myself on when my ego is driving something than like an actual motivation. So
yeah.
but overall, I really love the, social entrepreneurs that I'm connected with. I will say that I think one book that has been really helpful in kind of framing this mindset is Winners Take All,
Mm,
in kind of identifying, I think it's called like the elite charade of changing the world or
yeah.
something like that. But it kind of like hits on this perspective of are like when are we doing good because we want credit
Mm,
versus actually trying to improve stuff. So I would put that on your reading list if you haven't already read it.
mm. It's a wonderful one. I have it on my bookshelf right next to me here. But yeah, I'm with you on that as well. I sometimes feel like I have to kind of battle what is this feeling of scarcity on occasion to where
Mhm.
you can in especially in the context of engaging with other people. You can feel a sense of scarcity of like that there is a zero sum or that someone's success is at the detriment of yourself, and it almost has to be something
Mhm.
of a deliberate practice because I do think that it genuinely feels better to where you do prioritize like collaboration as opposed to competition.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I do think that sort of feeling of scarcity is a bit irrational. There,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
However, I would love to talk a little bit as to what's more recent with Soapbox. And from what I understand, maybe you've launched a community attached to Soapbox, a membership online this last year. Uh, what was the reason for doing that? Why did you feel like that was the next evolution of your work with Soapbox?
I again did not want to launch a community because I know how much work that is. But so as I mentioned earlier, I engage a lot with people who reply to the emails or like ask me any questions and, just really try to get feedback. Like, what do you love about the newsletters? What is missing? What would you like to see? Even if it's totally unrelated. And two of the main things that would stick out is like number one, I want some accountability. Like, great, I'm glad that you send these action plans, but I would like to know what other people are
Mm,
doing. And the like I guess the second, well, let's call it three reasons. So the second thing that would stand out is like very related to this concept of accountability. A lot of people would come back saying like, I feel really good that I did this thing, but it also feels like my actions don't matter,
mm,
and it's in part because I don't know what other people are doing, like climate change is still getting worse, like all of these things. And I just think that people would feel really alone. Like a word that I would hear a lot is isolated, because some people, people like me, I have convinced all my friends on all these topics, and my friends are also like individually amazing and making change in their own ways, but not everyone has the same kind of dynamic in their friend group. And so a lot of people would say like, I have no one to talk to about this, and I feel like I'm the only one doing like X, Y, and Z change. And then the third thing, like very explicitly, some people would say like I need a community.
mm,
So after about a year of getting this feedback, I knew I wanted to launch a community at some point. But the first thing that we did is launch events, which again is not again like a thing that I didn't think that we would do. But yeah, so we started launching these events that were action hours where you can show up. It will be made very easy for you. You don't need to like bring anything or buy anything. For example, we've done some letter writing events where we mail you the stamps and the envelopes if you sign up. And so all you have to do is show up and take action. So once we started doing those events, it was very clear how effective it was to bring people out of the newsletter and into an actual physical space.
mm,
Like by physical, yes, I mean virtual, but you get to see people's faces and you're actually doing something tangible and having conversations. And so like on our first letter writing event where we were writing to incarcerated people, I think we wrote like over 100
mm.
letters or maybe even 200. I don't remember the exact number. But after that, I was like, okay, we should continue testing these events, seeing if people like it, and like kind of just getting a better sense. And the more people that I would talk to, they were like, I would straight up pay a membership if I could come to these events for like, less than not having to pay for them each
Mm.
time. So that was kind of the point when I knew like, okay, now I have enough input where I can and should launch a community because people are asking for it. I'm not just like here being like, please come to my community. People like want to be connected. People also have specific things that they really enjoy, for example, like the events. And so once I had kind of that validation and like knowledge of why I'm doing it, and again like the specific problem that I'm solving, it made the decision a lot
Mm.
easier to join the community. I still dragged my feet on it for like 3 months, but finally in March 2021 we ended up launching it.
Mm. And so, what have you learned thus far as to what's most effective in getting people more engaged and active in an online community? Because it's one thing to just host the space, but I
Mhm.
have been a part of a lot of online communities that can feel like ghost towns.
Yeah.
What keeps activity high in your experience?
Yeah. So honestly, the community has surpassed my expectations in terms of quality. And I think that, so let's rewinding for a second just to align on definitions. My gripe is that the word community is thrown around a lot. I used to refer to our newsletter as our community, and I was like, we have 4,000 people in our community. Not true. It's not a community. Like anything that's unidirectional is not a
Mm.
community. And you would never say that in real life, right? Like if you were in real life were like at a convention center and you gave a speech, or like if you gave a TED talk, right? You would never say like I have a community of like 10,000 people or whatever. And so for whatever reason, people, including myself a few months ago, tend to just like use community for things that aren't a community. So I think a good gut check is like, would I call this a community in real life? And so I think that like when Soapbox turned from a platform into a community was when we started our events, because that's when we were actually gathering
Mm.
people. It wasn't just me talking, everyone was kind of contributing and sharing their ideas. And so anyway, that's just something that I feel has to be said. And then in terms of not making it a ghost town, I think the two most common problems that I see is number one, yeah, the ghost town thing. And number two, some communities just feel like message
Mm.
boards. Just because you have an online place to hang out doesn't mean it's a community. Because again, like, if you showed up to the mall and there was like five other people somewhere around you, you would not call that your community. And so I did a couple things like the stuff that you'll see all the time is like having community rituals, like posting wins every week and posting reflection questions, and we still do that. But I think the most one of the most important things is people have asked for events. Like that is the one of the main things that people have asked for. So for our members, we went from just doing monthly action hours to also having one event a month where it's just a community
Mm.
hangout, and then like two fireside chats a month. So basically, we have events every week, and that helps people show up, and they're like different formats. So there's some where you can participate. I mean, all of them you can participate, but some like encourage participation. Some of them you can just sit if you're like in the middle of a workday. And so I think that like tailoring different types of events for different scenarios that embed pretty easily into your life has been really important. Like our fireside chats, a lot of the times they're like in the mornings or during noon, whatever time zone that you're in, we change it up. But that's like the type of thing where if you're sitting at work and you have a lunch break, you can just like eat your lunch and dial
Mm.
in. So just like I think a main driver of engagement is understanding who is in the community, what are they looking for, what gets them excited. And I'm an extrovert, as maybe you can tell. I'm like obnoxiously extroverted. So one of the first things that I did is like reach out to as many of our community members that I knew were introverts, and I was like, hey, how can we make this like a welcoming place for you? What are you looking for? So I think once people feel like they are kind of at home, the engagement kind of takes care of itself. So that's like one thing. And the second thing is trusting your members.
Mm.
So in the very beginning, like March, April, I was freaking out. I was like trying to post stuff every day. I was like, why is nobody talking in here? Like, no, everyone hates my community. Like, I suck, all of those things. And I went to this talk, I think by Carrie Melissa Jones, and she's a community builder. And I think she was just like, if you're freaking out about your community, just don't post in it for like a week. You don't have to be posting all the time. So I realized the more I stepped back, I mean, not like always, this isn't always true, but in the beginning, the more I stepped back and just held space, the more people would step up and fill that
Mm.
space. And so I was on vacation for like almost a month, and people were moderating our fireside chats. People were posting stuff. People were asking questions because, like, step one is to create a space where they feel like it's for them. And step two is so that they understand that I am not the only one posting. Like, it is up to everyone to keep our community feeling like it's a real community. So, yeah, those are just a couple of things.
Mm. And so, what has you, I guess, most excited or looking forward as it relates to the development of Soapbox and the community specifically?
What has me most excited is our member hosted events. Like, I think that's the big, so we have maybe like 100-ish members in our community. It's a paid community. It's like $5 a month. So, we started, I don't even want to say started because it wasn't like this thing that I intentionally started, but basically in August, I would say August of 2021, a few months after we launched, people started suggesting events that they wanted, and I kind of was like, "Oh, you can host this." Like, I'm not going to host it, but you can. And so the most exciting thing for me, and like for me the biggest metric of success that I didn't even know was going to be a metric of success, was member hosted
Mm.
events, because that really shows that someone knows that the space is for them. They can step up, they feel confident enough. Like, we had someone that wasn't feeling, she was like, "I don't know how to host an event. I've never hosted an event." And she did one and it was great. And so just like seeing people as whole humans that, have their fears and have their little like quirks on what they want to do and don't want to do, and just using all of those things and like showing that this is your space to come as you are and host your member hosted events. Like, do what you want, and we're here to support you, and we're here to provide a
Mm.
framework, and we're not here to just like control. Like, the communities shouldn't be about control, they should be about collaboration. And so that has me the most excited about what we've been doing. What has me more excited about the future is really getting better about local
Mm.
action, because I think that like the best communities can transcend, they can be kind of hybrid. So they're not necessarily all online or not necessarily
Yeah.
all, offline. Like, think about some of your, like some of my best friends, I see them in person unless they've moved across the country, but we still have like a group chat that goes on. And so it's like, how do you kind of emulate the same type of feeling for like an online business community or whatever? And so one thing that we started doing, because I live in Seattle now, and so we've started making partnerships with local nonprofits and envisioning and like really doing this firsthand of what does it look like to make significant change in your city,
Mm.
whether that's policy, whether that's volunteering, whether that's donating. And so now that I kind of have a good-ish grasp on Seattle, I want to see how to share my learnings with everyone else in the Soapbox community, because every location is different. Like, Boston is going to be slightly different from Seattle. Up like city in India is going to be super different from a place like Seattle, but they're all going to have people that
Mm.
care and organizations that care. And it's like, now how can we use Soapbox as like the hub of people that are really excited to make that change? And like, I don't know, this is a really, really hard problem to solve, is scaling local action, but I'm really excited about it because this weekend we just did like the most awesome in-person volunteering event where we painted like an office for formerly incarcerated people. Anyway, so I'm just like really hyped about figuring out the frameworks to create change locally, but share those approaches globally. So I think it's going to take a while, but I'm really, really excited about it.
Mm. Yeah, and that should create some sort of overlapping strategies or approaches that will apply city to city. Of course, context changes, but yeah, I mean, change, creating significant change is a substantial but worthwhile goal. But at a minimum, what really seems to be great about that is that at a minimum, you're creating that localized community for members of Soapbox, or likewise giving them the playbook themselves to connect with people over these important interests and values. Because that can be,
Mhm.
easier said than done. To As an example, I just recently moved to Boston, but to understand what's going on here in the community of sustainability, social enterprise, all that, I would absolutely love if you could get started on this. If I could get a playbook essentially of what sort of organizations and folks I should speak to, what kind of
Yeah,
things that have been replicated in a city like Seattle that might apply to helping me establish a community around those important priorities and values and goals.
totally. Yeah, totally.
Well, and maybe with all this work in mind, I'm wondering what, and we've this has been layered throughout the entirety of our conversation, but what do you feel like you've learned about what inspires people to make changes meaningfully, be it small or big actions?
Convenience is one huge one. Like that's like probably a less inspirational one, but people want stuff. Okay, people want stuff that makes their life better, right? And like there's so many different layers to that.
Yeah.
For example, your life would be better if the world wasn't burning. Like that's an obvious one, and I think that's what gets people maybe started on their journey, either fighting climate change or working in different intersections of social justice. Like you see these problems so clearly in the world, and you know that the world would be better and therefore your life would be better if you did something about it. So I think that's like the outermost layer of like what gets people thinking about this. And then beyond that, I think what gets people really hyped is like to see, like to accept the negative and to accept the realities, but also to look for what's positive in it. And like I'm not a toxic positivity type of person. I know I'm very aware of the situation we're in. It's not amazing, but like looking into my own life, there have been so many positive aspects of creating social change. And so like yeah, three of them that I'll just like name is number one, buying secondhand, right? Like I used to be like the I have to go find a thrift store. What even is thrifting? Like, are the clothes gonna be dirty? All of that stuff. Once I finally joined my local Buy Nothing group, and that's like buynothingproject.org, and you can get stuff for free, and it's great. It's my favorite thing ever. I set up my whole apartment, like basically everything that you can see behind me, all those shelves and everything, all of that was free. It looks amazing. It made my life better. I would
Mm.
like go on walks during COVID and like kind of play a little scavenger hunt because I would have to go find where like the furniture was. And so that was like one of the clearest examples of how we I think we message social impact wrong. Like I think we message it as like a big obligation and a burden. And I do absolutely think that we are obligated. Like we should do something about problems that we see in the world, but it's more than that. And so that's like one example of how it's brought me joy, and framing it like that. Like if you know what the newsletter is like, I don't avoid hard topics, but I also kind of try to write about them kind of silly with like puns in the subject line. And I just think that makes people want to read it, right? Like I think people are more likely to open my emails that I've sent with like a some pun about like Elon Musk or poop emojis or whatever, that then like, okay, the world is burning. Please open this email. Another example is like learning about food waste. It was very scary and horrible to learn about it at first,
Mm.
but I've been way more creative in the
Mm.
kitchen. And so that's like another thing that I also see that people get really hyped on is we did like a food waste meal planning event. And when people can see like how to upgrade their lives, like you learn like 30 new recipes based on what's just in your fridge already. And who wouldn't want that, right? And so that's another example. And then the last like biggest thing for me has been showing people how this can help them like make friends and like really honestly create a community and stuff is just like the most I think that's going to be the biggest thing that gets you to stick with something
Mm,
like this, because we're all human. We're not going to do stuff if we're alone, like unless you have super willpower, which I don't. Like peer pressure is such a thing. And so if we can leverage that to be positive, I think that is what creates a lot of inspiration, because you're seeing the people around you doing awesome things and living their lives in a way that you want to live, whether that's sustainability or racial justice or, even like pursuing their desires through art. Like you just look around you and you want to emulate the positive behaviors of the people that you see. And so I think like that's one of the other biggest things that like I've learned has gotten people to take meaningful action, is just like show people that it's not just about doing good. It's about feeling
mm,
good and having fun. And like, yeah, the world is like can be a serious place, but you don't actually have to take yourself seriously all the time. And you don't have to like, I don't know, you don't have to be scared by this label of like being an activist or whatever. It's seriously what works for you. But all that matters is like you have to do something, and you have to keep trying to do something better every day. That's what I believe.
mm. I love that. Brilliant. With that, Nivi, I want to be respectful of your time here. You mind if I ask you a couple rapid fire questions before we finish up?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. First one. What's one book, movie, or resource that you might recommend to our listeners here? Something that's impacted you recently, or maybe a book that you always come back to?
Mutualism by Sarah Horowitz. I read it like maybe a week or two ago, and in addition to Winners Take All, I think that is a must read for any social
Mm,
entrepreneur. It's about like collectivism and kind of provides a framework for like how can you make the world better, and like I don't know, it just shows the examples of how you can use collective action to make change, but also like really just upgrade your
mm.
life.
Great recommendation. Next one for you. What's one daily habit or morning routine that you absolutely have to stick to, if anything?
Drinking coffee. I don't even think that I'm addicted to coffee. I just like to drink it.
Oh,
Beyond
that's what a
that,
coffee
I've
addict
been
would
trying.
say.
You're right, actually. You're right. And the one time we met in person was over coffee, so maybe I have some reflection to do. One thing that I've been trying to get into as far as morning routines is I read this book called Breath, and it's all about like breathing, and it's really really cool book. Anyway, I am trying to set aside like 5 minutes of my morning to do some breathing
Hmm.
exercises.
How long have you been doing that?
I've been doing it on and off since like May. I didn't do it at all when I was traveling, but I'm getting back into it
There
now.
we go. Very cool. And one last one for you. What's one piece of advice that you might leave our listeners with? These folks are social entrepreneurs and change makers from all sectors all over the world.
If you have an idea, get started on it and get as much feedback as you can, because that is what's going to set you apart. So, if you're if you've been thinking about something for a year, this is your sign that you should, like make that website, create that landing page and get feedback and get out of your own head and actually do something. And also take a walk. Like we've if you're listening to this, maybe you're indoors, go outside, take a walk, think about your idea and actually do
Hmm.
something.
Bias towards action, at least to even just get some sunlight on your skin, can really change your
Yes.
day. Well, excellent advice for us to end on, Nivi. Last thing, where should folks go to keep up with you and Soapbox? Where are the best places for them to follow?
Keep up with me literally anywhere on the internet. As an obnoxious extrovert, I'm also obnoxiously online, but I think the best place is Twitter. But anyway, I'm at Nivi Achanta. It's just my first and last name everywhere. So you can find me very easily. Soapbox, the best way would probably be, I mean, we're also on social media everywhere through Soapbox. Our Instagram is really fantastic, but the best way to actually stay in touch is signing up for our newsletter at soapboxproject.org. So those are, in my opinion, really fun and easy to read and easy to act on. So if you've been struggling with, what to do about climate change or any of the other zillion issues out there, the newsletter is an excellent place to start. Obviously, if you like it,
Hmm.
we have a ton of other things waiting for you, like events and our membership and all of that stuff. But the easiest and freest place to start is in your inbox. So that's soapboxproject.org.
Awesome. And we'll have all things Soapbox linked up at our show post at growunsolvable.com. Nivi, thank you so much once more for taking the time.
Thank you, Corey. This was so much fun.